Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the International Education Series, where we discuss the current state of education around the world in the wake of COVID-19. Today, we will be focusing on Asia specifically, and Cambodia and the Gulf Cooperation Council. This event is a community conversation with the Equity and Inclusion Fellows at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in collaboration with the International Education Policy Program and the Harvard Common Spaces. Find out more about the upcoming events at their website, commonspaces.harvard.edu. My name is Avi Anshika, and I will be the moderator for this interactive experience. At this point, I would like to request the audience to feel free to submit any questions that they have via our chat box. And for those of you who are unable to attend the live sessions and are now watching the recorded session, welcome. We hope that this conversation is both useful and informative in learning more about the international education landscape and how it is affected by COVID-19. Now, on behalf of the entire Harvard community, I'd like to welcome our panelists. First, Sajida Shroff, who is the CEO of Altamont Group and an international educational strategist. Second, we have Susan Kippels, who is a researcher for Regional Center for Education Planning at UNESCO. And finally, we have Elizabeth Pearce, who serves as the country director for Save the Children in Cambodia. Let us start off by grounding ourselves in the context of each panelist's work. Could you tell us about your organization, its purpose, who the organization serves, and finally your role in the international education space? Sajida, will start off with you, followed by Susan, and then Elizabeth.
Thanks, Avi. I'd like to thank you and the team for inviting me to be here today. It's a real pleasure. I always love talking about education, and especially with people that are in the field. So I'm sure this is going to be a really fun as well as insightful conversation. So I work with Altamont Group, and Altamont Group is a boutique education and advisory entity. We're based in the UAE. We're actually a homegrown entity. We work across the emerging economies, and actually now more and more so also into Europe. We're considered a local sector specialist in the sense that we focus on education with that big umbrella. So for us, education is anything that is education, which is curriculum development, which is capacity development. But we also look at things like youth and social development. We work a lot with education emergencies, which means we also work with CSOs and so forth. So for us, it's that big umbrella under which the education sector goes under. The company that I work with, Altamont Group, we have two arms. We have an investment arm and an advisory arm. Our investment arm focuses on university partnerships, brick and mortar, as well as technology investments. And then in the advisory, we have four buckets. So we have strategy and policy, where we work a lot with governments and ministries of education. We do a lot of monitoring and evaluation of bilateral and multilateral funded programming. And then we also do capacity development. And this is where we work with academic partners to develop bespoke programs for upskilling primarily also for government clients. And then of course we do QA and accreditation for higher education. When people ask me, why did we start Altamont Group and what's our real reason to do that? So I think that growing up, I always knew that I was one of the lucky ones. I got access to a wonderful, loving home, as well as incredible education. And I also saw that education can truly change lives and change the world. So Altamont, for us, our main purpose is we want to enable access to quality education. And we do a lot of work with underserved populations to enable them to get access. We firmly believe that education can shift the paradigm in the world, but only when education shifts its own paradigm. The motto of our company is education shift paradigm, because it has to go both ways. We have to walk the walk and talk the talk. So we have a role in international education that actually covers sort of multiple specters. Obviously, in the advisory role, we impact policy, we look at strategy across countries, and we help to both develop the strategy but also implement it. And then in the investment side, we're really focused on enabling access. So we come up with innovative solutions and innovative ideas, innovative programs that enable those that don't have access to quality education, to quality experiences, to better themselves, to educate themselves, get those opportunities. So that's really the focus of Altamont. And we're very lucky in that we can take on projects that help us realize this vision and our mission. And so I feel very fortunate that I get to be part of this organization and that I have an amazing team to work with. So that's a quick synopsis of Altamont Group.
Thank you so much. Susan, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Avi. I'd like to thank you and also Ashley and all the organizers for putting this panel together today. It's really wonderful to be a part of it. So since August, I have been working as a researcher at the Regional Center for Educational Planning, which is a UNESCO Category 2 center based in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. It's been operating since 2003. And for those of you who might not be familiar with UNESCO Category 2 centers, we are directly affiliated with UNESCO. And the difference is that we receive our funding directly from national governments. And there are UNESCO Category 2 centers all around the world. Like there's one in Syria, another in Saudi Arabia, and each of those centers have unique focuses. And for us, as the name implies, it's on educational planning and policies. And our mandate covers the Gulf states as well as the wider Arab region. We have several key strategic areas that we work towards, which include, among others, producing and disseminating knowledge, capacity building for institutions in the region, and providing technical support for SGD4. So in terms of what this actually means in terms of what we're doing, we do things, we conduct in-house research, and we also partner with external researchers to have them do research that we're looking for. We publish our research findings in Arabic and English and host a variety of programs and events to disseminate research. We also run a variety of targeted trainings to education leaders, is often in partnership with ministries of education from around the region. And we're also very active when it comes to SGD4. My colleagues regularly organize programs and meet with entities across the region to track how things are progressing in regard to SGD4. So in terms of my personal work at the center, since I'm in the research department, I focus on things like writing concept notes, terms of reference, and other documents that help guide our research with external researchers. I also oversee some of our English publications and work with both in-house and external research projects. I also help organize some of our programmatic activities. For example, we held a large conference in November here in the UAE, and that was something I was really involved with. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Elizabeth has to say.
Please go ahead, Elizabeth. We're excited to hear from you as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Avi, and thanks everybody for giving me the chance to reconnect with the broader Harvard community. I graduated from the International Education Policy Program in 2004, and to be honest, I haven't had an opportunity like this since then. So it's great to have the chance to cycle back and share some of my experiences. As you might know, I'm the country director for Save the Children in Cambodia. Save the Children is the world's largest independent child rights focused organization. So we work in more than 120 countries around the world. And globally, we're focused on 3 priority breakthroughs for children, which are that all children survive, learn, and are protected. And we're doing that both through our development and our humanitarian programming. So Save the Children's worked in Cambodia since 1970. And then we were one of the first organizations to reinitiate our programming after the fall of the Khmer Rouge here. And we played a really key role in rebuilding the education system since then. So over time, our role has really changed. Initially, we were providing direct services for children and their families and working to literally rebuild the education system, building schools and providing direct education services in the remote and hard to reach parts of the country. More recently, we've been deliberately shifting away from this service delivery modality and towards a much more nuanced way of working. So that's really trying to capitalize on our value added as an international NGO in the current context in Cambodia. So our theory of change, the way that we understand how we work in Cambodia and globally, centers on 4 priority areas. One is developing and testing evidence-based replicable solutions to the problems facing children. The second is to work in partnership with others, including NGOs, communities, the private sector, government, to ensure that children's rights are met, to share knowledge and to influence more broadly. The third is around leveraging our knowledge to support effective implementation at scale. So it's very rare that we're actually implementing a program at scale nationwide in Cambodia, but we really do focus on leveraging what we know in order to support the government and other actors in wider scale programming. And partially that's through the 4th area, which is around advocating and campaigning for better practices, policies, more resource allocation, and ensuring that children's voices are heard and that people have increased awareness of the key issues affecting children here. So for us in Cambodia, in our current strategic plan, we have 6 strategic priorities. The first is around integrated early childhood care and development, so multi-sectoral ECCD programming. The second is around quality pre-primary and primary education for the most disadvantaged and hard to reach children, and that's what I'll be talking about today. The third is around stunting prevention through multi-sectoral interventions. The fourth is on system strengthening for child protection, both at the community-based level as well as in terms of national policies and systems for child protection. The fifth is around youth participation and engagement in social accountability. And the sixth is on child-sensitive livelihoods and child-sensitive social protection. So we are working across a pretty wide range of issues in country. And one of the things that's quite interesting in especially in our COVID response, is that we're really seeing how there's a very important interplay across these areas. So as a child-focused organization, it is quite important for us to take that multi-sectoral lens. Our education work in Cambodia, through this strategy period, focuses on a few priority things. Historically, we focused a lot on community and school-based approaches to support educational quality, with a very strong focus on school leadership and community engagement, as well as quality preschools in hard-to-reach areas. We are now developing a very specific focus on inclusive education. And this includes both the inclusion of children in the more remote parts of the country, as well as children with special needs or linguistic diversity or other things that is limiting their access to education or their ability to really receive a quality education. We also do work around the resilience of the education system in terms of disaster risk reduction and response work. And then, of course, this emerging strategic priority on integrated early childhood care and development, which, as you know, is a really important area if we're supporting the development of the next generation in terms of their brain development and their capacity to really fulfill their full potential. And all of that, again, is being done in a way that informs systems level change. So we're one of the coordinating NGOs across the international NGO community here, and working very closely with the Ministry of Education and donors and development partners on supporting the development of policies and guidelines for education here. So I'm really looking forward to talking a bit more about the specific work that we're doing in this challenging, unprecedented COVID-19 period of time. Thank you, Avi.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been noticing that some of the attendees of this webinar are some of my classmates and peers and colleagues from the ed school. And the thing about this year has been we've been so grounded in our academic learning that we've sort of lost touch in terms of how the work is actually impacted on ground. I'm really curious to know how your work has been impacted by COVID. And we'll follow the same routine of having Sajida respond first, and then Susan, and then Elizabeth. But specifically, I wanted to ask you, what are the challenges that you're facing in your work, but also are there any bright spots? And what are some of the innovative things that you're trying to overcome the challenges that you might be facing? So whenever you're ready, Sajida, we'll start off with you.
Sure. Thanks, Avi. And it's so inspiring to hear from Susan and Elizabeth. So Susan and I actually know each other. So it's fun to see her and to catch up. And Elizabeth, you might have graduated in 2004. I graduated in 1995. But I have stayed a little bit connected to the school. Which is why it's always fun to support. So in terms of our work, we have been impacted. There's no doubt about it. A lot of our work is us going into countries to run programs. We work with international organizations such as, Plan International. We work with international organizations like Dubai Cares, with the Akan Development Network. And so we're often in countries trying to run programs, implement programs, monitor programs that are already existing. So the fact is we can't do that. So we're not able to do travel. We travel a lot, my team, and obviously we made a decision to stop travel as of early March. So we've been work from home since March the 5th. And we made that conscious decision to not put any of our people in danger, or their families. So that has been challenging for us in terms of just being able to do what we need to do and being able to take care of what we need to take care of in terms of our people and our projects. So that's definitely something that has impacted us. The silver lining in all of that, of course, is that we get to be home more. And for some of us who travel a lot, it's a real luxury to be home and to spend time with family. And we have much to be grateful for in that. And, our firm has always been very family friendly, and we've actually been, acknowledged as a very female friendly firm. And so we've always had kids running around in the background when we have our Zoom calls and whatever. We've been using Zoom before Zoom, became popular. And we always had kids in the picture. We travel, many of our team members, when there's when they're young mothers or they need to have the child travel with them, we've had people come with their kids on our field visits. We work around that, we accommodate that, we definitely take care of that. So for us, having that is not so much of a change. What is that we feel like we can't be in the field to make things happen, and so that can sometimes be a bit frustrating. On the other hand, we're all caught up with all reports. We're all caught up with all of the desktop work that we continue to put off. So that is definitely a positive. What we've also realized is that in this time, we have some understanding and some expertise about the way education can change and how it can shift to be more responsive and more agile. I come from a school where I've often seen that educators are the last ones to make change. We definitely talk the talk, but we don't always walk the walk. And so this is a time when we can actually reflect on the importance of the agility within our own domain. And when we think about theory of change, we have to think about, what is that new normal going to be for the young people that we're striving to support and work with and to give programming to, and therefore, what do we need to change in our approach? So we have actually come up with 3 CSR initiatives in this time that draws upon the expertise that we have, but enables us then to really give back and show some agility. So I can talk about them now, or I can wait and talk about them later. Avi, what would you prefer?
Now sounds great. Yeah.
Okay. So we have 3. So because we've had time to reflect on the needs of the future, and really we don't even know what the new normal is going to be, but we can see some shifts in how things are going to fall into place when we think about education and learning and face-to-face and so forth. And so this provides opportunity both for the general population, but also for some of our specific populations. So we do a lot of work with education in emergencies. We support refugee education as another one of our areas. So we are seeing some opportunities where we can capitalize on what we're going to do for the general population to actually make it useful and valuable for different, the underserved population, so to speak. So there's 3 things that we've been doing that have actually been received quite well. The first is that in the country, in the UAE where I live and a number of my team members live, the youth have been very confused about those kids that are in grade 11 and grade 12 don't know what's going to be their new normal in the fall, right? And so especially those students who've applied to university, they have no idea what's going to be happening with the university in the fall, but many of them are also stuck because, they're supposed to be writing their final exams, but those exams are all up in the air as well. So we've been doing a series of webinars where we're actually contacting universities literally around the world, contacting all of the boards that run the exams, the IBs and the A-levels and the Indian system, and we're getting them to give us firsthand information, and then we're able to disseminating it to the youth. And we put this out as in the public domain. And actually, we've even put a video now out on YouTube. And our first webinar, we put it out, and we had 4 days notice, and 1,000 people signed up from literally around the world. And it just showed you that there was such there's fear, of course, but there was just a gap in information. And we're trying to make sure that, we're providing the most credible information. And so we're working with the universities and as part of those conversations, we're learning more and more, and we're fine tuning some of the obviously the website, the webinars that we put out. So we've done a series of 2. We're going to do another one in a couple of weeks, and we'll continue to do this. So it does take a lot of time on our part to get the information because it's all firsthand information. But then this is something that is useful for the young people, and so we're doing that. So that's that's a series that we're doing, and we have a dedicated set of resources assigned to that. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been doing a program around learning from home support. So now globally around the world, K-12 students are all learning from home. And it's not the same as homeschooling because they haven't, even the curriculums have not been shifted to that. And the parents are certainly not equipped for it. And the teachers have not been equipped to do that kind of teaching, right? They haven't been equipped to teach that way. And so there's a lot of challenges, both from the teaching side, but also from the student side. And so we set up a program where we're doing learning from home support, and we offer sort of guidance and tips. And we're working currently with about 600 students around the GCC, and giving them support in helping them figure out how they can best cope with learning from home, and also giving their parents tips about how they can support them in learning from home. So this is a whole nother program that we've set up. And then we're also looking, and so putting these two together and putting together sort of the idea of where are our high school students going to go and what do they need to think about in terms of future planning. And then thinking about the learning from home challenges, we're looking at a homeschooling concept that can be provided to our general population, but that will also be very, very useful for our education and emergencies populations and our refugee populations. So this is a concept that we're actually piloting now, with our hope that this can be launched ahead. So basically it's a homeschooling concept, but with a lot of support systems and structures built in that enable the learning to be offline or online, depending on technology access. Because of course that's something that we know not everybody has, even though we're making that assumption that everybody does, but that's not the reality. So that's something we're working on. And then the fourth CSR, because I realized that we have one more, is that we're talking to people about figuring out careers of the future. You know, when kids are thinking about, for example, university applications today, they don't have the opportunity to do their extracurricular activities. So they're concerned about that application process, but then they're also concerned about, what should I do in the future? What's the new world order going to look like that I should be preparing for? So our focus has been to think about what should that look like, to do research and to think about trends, but to think about it in a more pragmatic way and not just the visualization of it, but actually what does it turn into in terms of a student's focus, in terms of their career, in terms of their opportunities, in terms of, you know, how they should be preparing for that from now, because this is what's freaking out young people today. So we've been really lucky in that because we've had this time and we've been home, but we have a super team of experts, we're able to pull together our knowledge, and we're able to pull together some programs that are helping people even now cope, but will also hopefully prepare them to cope post-COVID into the new normal. So I'll stop now because I want to hear what Susan and Elizabeth have to say as well. Thank you.
That was incredible. Thank you so much, Sajida. I think one of the things that will stay with me is, again, reflecting on the importance of agility. And what I hear from your response really is how you're putting that in action. And that's amazing. Shifting gears now, I'd love to hear from you, Susan, about how your work has been impacted by COVID. And again, are there any bright spots in this, and how are you adapting to this new normal?
Yeah, thanks, Avi. And it was great to hear all that Altamont group is doing, Sajida. Some really wonderful initiatives happening. So like everyone, our work has definitely been altered and changed. However, at the heart of it, like our core activities, they haven't changed. However, the focus and topics of medium for delivery definitely have. We're all working from home now and spending lots more time online and on Microsoft Teams and different online venues. And in a lot of ways, we've shifted our modes of communication. And for one example, in terms of our events, yesterday we held a policy dialogue online about assessments during COVID-19. That was originally supposed to be an in-person event for a group of maybe 30 individuals to attend from around the Gulf. And we held that event. It was originally going to be about assessments, but we talked to the stakeholders, asked around what's needed, because obviously a general thing about assessments right now isn't the most relevant. So in this webinar, we explored issues like, should assessments be happening? If they should, how do you account for the learning gaps? What modifications need to be made? Things like that. And while there's obviously benefits to having things in person and the networking that happens during those events, I'd say one silver lining to this was that there were hundreds of people who were able to join the webinar, which wouldn't have been able to happen otherwise. So great that the information was shared with lots of people. And that my work has shifted in other ways as well during this time. For example, last month I was asked to work on a report about reopening schools during COVID-19. And this was a request from the Ministry of Education here because they wanted to know what's happening around the world. What should we be thinking about when we're reopening our schools? So there were challenges associated with that too. It had to be done much faster than something like a report would usually have to be done. But at the same time, it was also really rewarding to know that I was able to work on projects that are actually being used by policymakers and compiling information that's relevant and useful to people. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Elizabeth again. Thanks.
Thank you, Sajida. Elizabeth, we spoke about some of the challenges in your work yesterday during our brief conversation, but I'd love to dig in deeper and yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So let's see, in Cambodia, most of our work was initially put on hold. And we went into full work from home mode as I think most organizations throughout the world did. And this was largely to ensure the safety of our staff and partners, and actually also to mitigate the risk that we would be responsible for transmission through our program activities. So once we went into sort of that safe working arrangement, we went through a process of looking at our existing portfolio and identifying how we could basically adapt the portfolio for the COVID context. So in our existing education work, what types of activities could be repurposed, perhaps taking up sort of more of a digital platform, but continue to move forward with their original objectives, which activities needed to be paused completely, and where could we possibly divert funding towards new priorities. We recognize that in a context like Cambodia, it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get a lot of new funding for COVID-19 period work. So it is important that we adapt the portfolio. And I just say that because of the global educational context and the crisis across so many different settings. So we went through a program adaptation. We initially did a lot of work around risk communication and community engagement. And this was around developing messages for children and caregivers on COVID-19 and disseminating those messages through videos, posters, smartphones, social media. Some of that was linked to our education platform, and some of that's linked to other avenues of communication that we have in place in Cambodia. We're actually about to launch a children's animation series, edutainment series, kind of like Peppa Pig, but with a family of rabbits. That's focused on key behaviors and other issues around COVID-19 prevention. The idea is it's for children ages 5 to 10 that they'll watch with their family members and thus help with the broader uptake of good practices. So with education specifically, schools have been closed since mid-March. And the Minister of Education just last week has said that he doesn't think that they will reopen until the next school year. So we're looking at education at schools being closed throughout the country, public and private schools being closed until at least November, which in the context of Cambodia is likely to be rather devastating. When I spoke with the Minister of Education a couple weeks ago, or I guess it was a couple months ago now, early on, he was mostly looking at the safety and protection of children, both in terms of disease prevention and just in terms of how to keep them safe if they aren't in school. Since then, they've done a lot more around digital platforms. So the Ministry of Education, as well as a lot of development partners and NGOs, are working on digital and e-learning. They're taking resources from across a range of organizations and putting them on their websites and discussing various ways to use technology. And speaking of bright spots, I think for the Ministry of Education, they're really seeing that as the bright spot because it's giving them the incentive to develop these technology-based platforms that really haven't taken off in Cambodia to date. Unfortunately for us, and with our focus in the communities that we're working with, this is less of a bright spot. Because what we're seeing is that, in the areas where we work, we just did an assessment across 2 provinces where we're working. And on average, only 20% of children had access to a smartphone. or digital and e-learning platforms. And, you know, so even beyond the challenges that we would typically face around how do you do effective digital learning for young children, how do you set up the support systems in their communities and their families to make sure that they're learning, like the challenges I face with my 5-year-old son right now. The challenge beyond that is that many children just don't have access to technology. And then on top of that, they're coming from families that already are facing other devastating challenges right now related to COVID. A lot of, you know, the economic impact is massive here. So if you have a child who has there's also a lot of generational differences. So the parental generation doesn't, generally speaking, have a very high level of comfort in supporting schooling and educational outcomes. So you have sort of these compounding factors that mean that a lot of the more disadvantaged children are going to be extremely disadvantaged through this period, right? So our team's been really working on problem solving their way through this. And a lot of what we're doing now, some of it's forward-looking and some of it feels very practical. So we're doing a lot of work around paper-based solutions, actually. So how do we work with schools and teachers, essentially to develop and deliver, you know, sort of homework sheets and these sorts of things to children, setting up study clubs with smaller groups of neighbors, essentially. Right now, COVID transmission is very low in Cambodia. In fact, there haven't been any new cases for several weeks, and all the other cases are fully recovered. So we're taking advantage of this period to sort of activate some of this. So in terms of direct delivery for children, even though the Ministry of Education has a lot of digital solutions, most of our work digitally is with teachers and school administrators and provincial and district level education officials. So we're doing a lot of work with basically doing workshops with provincial and district and school level teams of people. We have workshops around basically what are the government guidelines now and how do we get more practical with them. You know, how do you take a 7-page guidance document that's all text and really work through it with people so they understand what needs to be done locally. Working with the technical teams at the local level and in schools on basically understanding you know, key subject areas and lessons and thinking about how they're going to do it in a remote way and what's the best way to deliver it. Working with school management committees and parents on how to support learning locally. And then with some of our early childhood groups, we've been setting up Facebook parent groups. And that's actually been fairly effective. So even though children don't have access to technology, there is a fair amount of coverage for both teachers and parents, not the most disadvantaged parents, but some parents. And so we're engaging them in that way. We're also doing some work specifically, we've done a lot of work recently around Cambodian Sign Language. So we are doing work to make sure that the key messages around COVID and all of this is also delivered in a platform where hearing impaired children can benefit from them. And then broadly speaking at the national level, actually the work that I'm more engaged in is that we are, as co-chair of the Global Education Cluster, we're now playing a convening role across all the international NGOs here in Cambodia, where we have a Education and Emergencies Working Group where we're working together across 15 organizations to basically better understand our priorities and ensure that we're effectively channeling our learning and both from on-the-ground assessments as well as innovations into the national level dialogue. So I'm the representative on the Education Sector Working Group of that international NGO community, and that's where we're meeting with the UN, with donors, and with the Ministry of Education to exchange practices. I think I've, in a non-linear way, probably covered most of the points that I wanted to get to, so maybe I'll pause. Oh, I did have a few more challenges just in terms of the remote working modalities. You know, as an international organization, especially in a humanitarian situation or in a situation where you're really trying to develop innovative practice, it's quite common that at that point in time, you're developing new partnerships and you're also leveraging new technical capacities from outside of your own team. And both of those things are quite difficult to do in the context where you don't have face-to-face interaction. So I would say one of the additional challenges specific to this strange period is around figuring out how to sort of build these remote partnerships, tackle new challenging areas without a lot of face-to-face interaction, and leverage technical assistance through a more remote modality. Which is also a bright spot because it means that we're probably going to become much more efficient as a result of that and much better at working globally on local level solutions. Yeah, so overall, Avi, I mean, I just think that the key for us is around, or the thing that I'm most troubled by right now is the impact of these school closures on really the most disadvantaged populations here. You know, a child whose parents have lost their jobs, who's out of school, whose parents are not well educated. It's very likely that that child's going to start working during this period because it's such an extended period and the economic pressures are so strong. And it's going to be increasingly difficult to figure out how to support those children to come back to school when schools do reopen, and how to make sure that they are able to catch up and get back into the action. So that's something that's for me a real priority for us as a child-focused organization.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for your thorough response. At this point, we're transitioning into an open space where we can ask each other questions. And I already see some of the questions coming in that are directly addressed to the panelists. But at the same time, I encourage the panelists to ask questions to each other if you have any about the work that y'all have been doing. Elizabeth, specifically for you, there's a question that came in about the Cambodian deaf education. The participant said that they are a child of deaf adults, and they're always curious about how deaf education in different contexts looks like. I think you mentioned briefly that there was inclusivity of the efforts that you are promoting. Could you speak a little bit more about again deaf education in Cambodia?
Yeah, sure, of course. In Cambodia, Cambodian Sign Language has just recently been standardized and agreed on. So historically, like in many contexts, deaf children would develop their own form of sign language and use that with their families or in their communities, but then they wouldn't be able to communicate with other deaf children or adults in other contexts. So we do have a standardized Cambodian Sign Language now. One of the things that Save the Children's been doing over the last, I guess, 2 or 3 years is working on teaching that Cambodian Sign Language to children in remote areas. And we've been doing that through technology-based platforms, actually. So we've developed in partnership with a local NGO that does a lot of historic work around deaf education. We've been developing modules that can be tablet-based to help support children and teachers and their classmates in learning basic Cambodian Sign Language. And it's really taken off. It's made a huge difference for those children. Previously, they wouldn't be in school, or if they were in school, teachers and school administrators would just think that they were stupid, essentially. So when you go out and you visit these program areas now, it is quite inspiring in that these children are much more engaged in the school setting, playing with other children, and actively engaged in their learning. But that was just a fairly small, those modules are now posted through the Ministry of Education, and in areas where there's multiple deaf children in the same school in particular, they're being taken up. But it is a very challenging area. Cambodia is not a very dense country. It's very dispersed, and so a lot of these issues around inclusion are especially difficult as a result of that, because you wouldn't often have more than one hearing impaired student in a community setting. yeah, it's a very interesting area of work here. There's a lot to be done.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, so I'm going to ask them both, and you can address them in whichever way you'd like. And we can start with Sajida again and then Susan. But the question was, how do you engage parents in your work? And the second question is there any kind of preparation you can do to prepare for the potential second wave of COVID that is anticipated to arrive closer to July or something like that? So if you have any thoughts on that, Sajida, please tell us.
Sure. So in terms of how we interact with parents, so for us, a lot of our work is more at either the government strategic level, or if it's the program implementation level, we're definitely working more with kids. Having said that, with our homeschooling initiatives, we work directly with parents because we're trying to give parents the support and the tips that they need to help with learning from home. So that is really how we work more with parents than anywhere else, but I mean, our interventions are targeted at children or at the government strategic level, so it's not really parent-centric. In terms of preparing for the next wave, I think from our purposes, in terms of the work purposes for us, in terms of an organization, it's really just buckling down and staying focused and staying motivated. It's sometimes very difficult to stay motivated when you can't go into the field and you can't see the children and you can't work with them. So that becomes very challenging. And then, Susan was talking about the fact that, there is opportunity to affect policy, but like, for example, there's some things that we're working on right now, but it's been put on hold. And so staying motivated and staying engaged and staying focused is something that we're, as an organization and also on a personal level, is something that we're continuing to strive for. And in terms of preparing for the next wave, for us, given where we are and given what we're seeing in terms of the needs and the need to be agile, what we're seeing is the value add that we can provide at this time is to really just make ourselves available and say that, listen, we're here, we're able to support, through the intellectual development of program areas, of solutions, of agile solutions that take into account the needs of the population, the access that they might have to technology or not have access to technology, because even Elizabeth talked about the fact that they're looking at paper products now, going back to really the old-fashioned ways, making sure that the solutions are contextually viable, whatever that context is. So we work across the emerging economies, so even though we're not able to physically go, we've still been able to provide solutions to populations in Zambia, in Kenya, in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, like by putting together programs that they can actually implement offline, because for them technology is not as so accessible. So maybe one person has access, but then they can share, right? So we've had to recreate and reorganize some of the ways that we're doing things to enable that. So I mean, the next wave, I hope it's not coming, but if it is coming, we just continue to be as agile as we can and to be as responsive to the needs as they evolve and as they continue to come forward.
Thank you. Susan, your thoughts on parental engagement and in like preparation for a potential second wave, if one can be prepared? Yeah.
Sure. Parental engagement, it's definitely an issue here in the schools in the UAE. I know the Al Qasmi Foundation has done a lot of research on this subject. It's another research institute here in the UAE, and they found that it's really difficult to engage fathers. And they did a lot of research looking at what's happening in families. But then actually the Regional Center for Educational Planning, where I'm working now, we're actually in the process of partnering with the university here in the country to learn more about how to better connect parents with schools. And so lucky for us, hundreds of schools were surveyed, public schools already, about that. Surveys went home to parents and they were returned. But then unfortunately we hadn't surveyed the private schools yet. So that's one of the challenges we're facing, is how to get those parent responses without being able to do it in person. But that hasn't been analyzed yet, but hopefully that survey, that study that's being done will show us some tangible ways on how to better engage parents in schools here and across the country. And then in terms of the second wave, I don't think I have too much new to add besides, in addition to what Sajida said. I think just echoing what she said, that things have to stay flexible and agile. And I think the education system here, I think they're working closely with the health authorities to just stay aware of what's safe for and what's best for students and the well-being of all the school stakeholders.
I wanted to just add something to piggyback on what Susan said. So I know, like, one of the initiatives that we are getting to work on right now is actually looking at the predictability of student performance over time, and taking into account very specifically the current context of the CV-19. So this is actually a program out of the national ministry, and it's been run out of the Abu Dhabi office. And it's actually looking at what will be the impact of CV-19 on long-term student results, and therefore what will be the impact for them on future education. So we're the education specialists in that, and working with data scientists and all these other, scientific technology people. But from our perspective, it's really looking at the education aspect and the education element. So these are things that, not that they're preparing for the next wave, but they're kind of thinking beyond the next wave and what we have to prepare for in the new normal. So I just wanted to piggyback because Susan reminded me of that.
It's great. We have a question that just came in regarding the Facebook-based early childhood parental support. Demography-wise, who are you reaching, rural, urban education level? And could you please give an example of how do you keep parents engaged through Facebook? What are the supports you provide that these parents find most helpful?
Sure, and I have to say, actually, I was speaking with our early childhood advisor earlier today, and she sent me some examples over WhatsApp, and I haven't had a chance to open them. But if whoever wrote this question, if you want to put your email in the chat box, I can share more information with you. And I've just clicked on something now, I can't find you guys. But overall, what I'm familiar with is basically we've put together Facebook groups of around 20 parents that are still facilitated by the local level educators that we work with. So Save the Children's working then with them to identify the parenting practices that we're trying to support, and then to disseminate materials through their ongoing parent groups. Sorry, I'm getting very distracted because I can't see you all. There we go. Okay, that's much better. I was like looking at my screen. This includes videos demonstrating specific parenting practices. It includes tips and nudges towards key parental behaviors. It's also leveraging, we've recently developed actually an early childhood app. So it's linking into some of those materials that we've developed for that app in Khmer, and then posting those to the Facebook groups. My understanding is, and I haven't actually seen these groups in action, but my understanding is that the educator then posts a video, the parents go off and practice it, and then report back to each other on their experiences through the Facebook chat function. And I think it's working fairly well overall, but we are having typical challenges around, certain sort of core parents being very active and others being rather silent. So we're doing sort of real-time learning as we go and trying to figure out how to address these issues. The issues around accessibility are very real. So, in the figures that I was looking at earlier today, depending on the location, maybe 10 to 70% of children might have a parent who has Facebook on their phone. And so it is those children's parents that we would be reaching through this modality. So it is limited in that way.
Thank you for asking such a great question, Felicia, and thank you for putting down your email address. Elizabeth, Felicia has put down her email address in the chat box, so
Okay.
I'm forward it to you so that you can give her more information.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So we have one more question that I could address to all three of you, which is, what are the specific opportunities that have come along due to this pandemic? And I kind of want to piggyback and add another question to this, which is, what are you most hopeful for? And Sajida, I'd love to start with you and love to hear your response on, again, what are the opportunities that have come along during this time, and what brings you hope?
So I think the opportunities, I was reflecting on this actually after Avi and I had our quick sort of pre-panel chat. And I think the opportunities are really that we can be more reflective. Often in the work that we do in sort of the everydayness of life, you're so busy doing that you don't stop to think. And so what this has given us time to do is to stop and think and to really reflect on the usefulness and the effectiveness of the interventions that we often put into practice. So for us as an organization, that's been very useful to strategically think about, you know, what is it that we're trying to do? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And are we truly, you know, walking along a road that enables that mandate? So allowing for that reflection, reflecting therefore, and then changing and being agile to change our approaches, to change our pedagogy, to change our methodology, to change our strategy, even in terms of, you know, some of our key elements that we're trying to impact. So for us, that's been a valuable opportunity, and also to come together as a team. You know, often when we're running around, we don't have the time to actually come together and to have those conversations. And we do it over Zoom multiple times. So we're just in a meeting and chit and chat. And now we're on Zoom all day. And so there's always time to catch up virtually over that cup of chai, especially once Ramadan is over. So that's important for us as a team for Altamont. I think the other thing that's an opportunity here is to really think about what will be the needs when we think about post-TB. We know that it's going to be a new normal. We don't know quite yet what that new normal is going to be, but it's going to be a new normal. And so we have the chance now to think about, you know, pre-planning a little bit and putting in some measures and some areas of support that can help us transition to the new normal as we figure out what it's going to be. So that is another opportunity. And Avi, what was the second question?
The second question is, what brings you hope?
Oh, what brings me hope? So what brings me hope is a lot of things, actually. When I look at my own family, you know, I'm getting to spend a lot of time with them because we're home, and you know, learning from each of them. That's part of my family, and just, you know, I'm inspired by the things that they do, how they're approaching the situation. You know, my mom is truly a great inspiration for me in terms of who she is and how she's handling CV in amongst of everything else. My brother continues to be, you know, continues to look so far forward that it just makes me fall short on where we have to go and how many things we actually have the chance to do and to accomplish. That gives me hope. What gives me hope is when I talk to my team members and I see their kids running around in the background and they're doing okay. They're doing okay. You know, that gives me hope. And then I draw a lot also from other programs that I'm involved in and supporting, and some of the initiatives that we're seeing and the dedication of people. What gives me hope is that we're coming together, not because we have to, but because we want to. And we're making time for each other and finding ways to connect. And it's now moving away. Somebody actually said this on a panel I was just on right before this call. We're moving away from it being about ego to it being about eco, and not eco as in the ecosystem, but eco as in us as people. So I think that's a very powerful moment for me as well. And that definitely gives me hope.
Thank you. Susan, where are you at with this last question about opportunity and hope?
I think there's a real opportunity stemming from COVID-19 that in the long term, education systems can come out of it much stronger. There's so many methods of learning and new programs and different things that are being implemented. And my hope for those is that they're studied and evaluated, and that we're able to learn about what works best. And then taking those best practices, that we're able to implement them and turn them into policies and adjust things accordingly to ultimately benefit students and learners. I don't know, I guess I'm hopeful that throughout this time, the well-being of students is protected, especially the most vulnerable, and that people see this as an opportunity to come together and, yeah, really work together and think about those who need it the most. Support. Yeah, that's all I've got.
Elizabeth, do you have thoughts on, again, opportunities? And again, what brings you hope during this time? What keeps you motivated to show up?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, there's opportunities, sort of technical opportunities that are quite interesting, right? Around, as we were saying, around, you know, distance learning and these sorts of things. But the specific thing that I've noticed, both in terms of Save the Children as a global organization and in terms of the development environment in Cambodia, is kind of an incredible coming together and teamwork. you know. And to me, what you see in these moments of crisis is kind of a fabulous moment where silos drop out of place and everybody realizes that we're all working around some very challenging issues, and that the best way to get through it is to collaborate together. And so I've actually found that quite inspiring, both in terms of watching Save the Children as a global organization respond to the crisis, and in terms of the environment here where, you know, we're being asked to engage as NGOs in some very critical discussions, and people are sharing information in a way that doesn't always happen. So this call that I had earlier today was sort of the heads of agencies of the UN. At the end of that, we were talking about, okay, how are we going to share these assessment results? You know, what are the platforms that we can use to better information share and ensure that we're all, you know, well informed and responding to the right issues and learning from each other's practices. And I just think that's fantastic. And it's a very inspiring environment to work in as a result of that. And I guess that's what brings me hope also, right? So that level of collaboration, and then specifically the resilience of my team through all of this. You know, when we closed our office and put everyone on work from home, people were warning me that, you know, no one's actually going to work from home. You know, just be prepared. Nothing's going to happen during this period. And it's been the opposite. I mean, the levels of engagement of my team on these critical issues, and their passion and their commitment to the work that we're doing, and to moving all of that forward, even as they're facing the challenges of childcare and all of this, I find it quite inspiring, and I'm really impressed by what people have managed to get done. So I think that's the top thing that brings me hope. I am quite troubled, if I'm totally honest, about what this is going to do to Cambodia, you know, in terms of the compounding factors of the economic impact of all of this. And you know, I think what's going to get us through that is this teamwork and the people we have working with us and for us, and you know, a willingness to just keep going despite the challenges, and get through this. And I do think in the end we may come out with a much stronger education system as a result of this. And the development of the remote working modalities will benefit the education system in the long run. And even if it's not benefiting the most disadvantaged children at this point in time, ultimately it will probably lead to better national level coverage as the technology infrastructure improves overall in the country. So I guess that's rather hopeful as well.
Thank you so much. I was specifically thinking about myself and so many of my colleagues as you all were answering this question. I think I brought this question up with Elizabeth last night when we were talking, and I was like, how does one get involved? And Elizabeth said, just get involved. Now's the time to do it. And there's need for it as well. This conversation for me was truly invigorating and inspiring. Thank you so much for being present here today. And I can't believe an hour has flown by. Before we close this session, I have a reminder for everyone who's joining us live to be sure to check out the upcoming events in the International Education Series. Tomorrow, we continue our focus on Asia, specifically in India, and learn more about the international education organizations based in India and how they've been impacted by COVID. So I hope to see you all tomorrow as well. And finally, to our panelists, Sajida, Susan, and Elizabeth, I'm deeply grateful for your participation. This was truly an exceptional experience for me. I learned so much. And on behalf of the entire Harvard community, I thank you for your insight, your leadership, and this opportunity to connect with each of you. I wish all three of you the best of health, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Avi, for being a great moderator. And it's such a pleasure to see Elizabeth and to just hear about your wonderful work. And of course, to see Susan, always great to see you and to hear about all the exciting things that you're doing as well. But thank you so much for the opportunity. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Avi, and the rest of the team.
Bye.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you, everybody.